Welcome back after the break. As a reminder, I'm Sally McFarlane, and I'm accompanied by Moses Mkhotsi.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed your nice mid-morning break and also had a lovely time listening to talks in the previous interesting session. So the following session is going to have 5 talks, and we're going to start off by delving deeper into some radio astronomy, starting off talking about the circulometer array, and then talking about some science that has been done related to radio telescopes. This will be followed by an in-depth look at the history of salt, and then we'll round off the whole session by talking about astronomy in the wider sense as an African continent. And that should be a very, very interesting session, so keep your eyes on it.
So, just a reminder, we'll be having questions after the presentations. But please remember to put your questions into Slido Q&A as soon as you've got them. If you've got any technical questions, head over to the discussion board. Right, let's get to our first speaker today, Dr. Rob Adam.
Thanks, Sally. I hope you can hear me and
Yes.
everyone can hear me.
It's all good.
Good. I'm going to talk today about MEERKAT and MEERKAT extension. And since this is only 15 minutes, I'm going to take some shortcuts, given that Phil Diamond spoke extensively about the SKA itself yesterday. Okay, first, what are we? I'm the Managing Director of the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, and this is the primary science and engineering interface with the international SKA array organization, responsible for South Africa's contribution to the infrastructure engineering aspects of the radio telescope, SKA radio telescope, development and management of the Karoo Observatory site, design, construction and operation of the MEERKAT radio telescope, management of all radio astronomy initiatives and facilities in South Africa, and human capital development to ensure successful utilization of all facilities. Now, where did all this start? I was fortunate enough to be heavily involved in the early policy developments with respect to science made by our government post-1994. And in the white paper, 1996, there is a paragraph which speaks, and I'm not going to read all of it because of the time constraints. It's there on the screen and will be there saved for you. But essentially, it's that scientific endeavor is not purely utilitarian. There's an intellectual and cultural aspect to it. Also, the big iconic science projects, if managed well, also provide a mechanism to develop high-tech industry capabilities. Also, if you only put these projects in the strongly scientific developed countries, developing countries will make slower progress, and also we will lose our best young people to those developed countries. So that was the basic argument for it there. We then selected some principles appropriate for developing countries in terms of choosing areas to focus on. Some areas that are just plain necessary for national competitiveness, IT, biotech, etc. Others present some geographic advantage, for example, astronomy and human origins for South Africa. Others present a problem advantage, HIV/AIDS is an example of that, developing vaccine. Others present a knowledge advantage. In other words, we're ahead of the game in terms of what we know. Traditional knowledge or deep level mining for South Africa. Out of that, we distilled a bunch of areas to focus on. I won't go into all of them because of time constraints, but one of these was astronomy, basically because the Northern Hemisphere needs the southern skies. This is an area that we believe we could attract big investment in terms of scientific infrastructure into our country, and it turns out we were correct. 3 bands of wavelengths available to ground-based observations, optical. So we went out and we looked for a partner. Result of that was SALT. Gamma, Hess in Namibia. Now we were partly facilitative of that, part of that consortium. And then radio. SKA will be the most advanced radio telescope and the most extensive piece of research infrastructure ever to be built. So that's a bit of a policy background. Given the interference of basic human activity, lights and cell phones, etc., with astronomy, we felt it necessary to pass the Astronomy Geographic Advantage Act, enacted in 2009. The AGA Act gives the Minister of DSI powers to protect the Northern Cape Astronomy Reserve. We had consultations on it, and we have bilateral agreements with various sister departments to ensure harmonious coexistence with other sectors such as mining, energy, aviation, defense, telecoms, etc. I don't know whether you can see that map there. It's a little bit small. Apologies in the slide, but that area in the Northern Cape bounded there, roughly square, not quite. That's the area we're talking about. I've said that Phil Diamond already told you about the bigger project yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat what he said. I'm going to go straight on to MEERKAT and MEERKAT extension, showing, of course, the contingencies, the boundaries with the SKA. Okay, how do the different phases fit together? Well, we built a single antenna, the so-called XDM, in 2007. Cat7, we then, given the fact that we had not built arrays before, we thought that we were going to build a small one first. Cat7 completed in 2010 as an engineering test bed. 8 years later, we launched the MEERKAT, 64 dishes. MEERKAT extension adds 20 SKA, not MEERKAT antennas, to MEERKAT between 2021 and 2024. And then the SKA phase 1 proceeds roughly in parallel with that, 2021 to 2028. So you've got MEERKAT plus, MEERKAT extension, 84 antennas, plus 113 SKA dishes. 20 of the MEERKAT dishes are also SKA dishes, making 197 in all. Up to 80 kilometers baseline to call for the SKA, phase 1, phase 2, beyond 2028. Full dish requirement, thousands of dishes, some say 2,000, some say 3,000. And then also incorporating a full dense aperture array with 250 stations, 180 kilometers baseline. So that's the plan. And we are where we are. We've built the MEERKAT until this point. Thumbnail of MEERKAT, largest and most sensitive array telescope in the world, designed by South African scientists and engineers and built with 75% local content, phased development using prototypes, focusing very much on the engineering and particularly systems engineering to make sure it all functions together. Total construction budget of about 3.2 billion over 5 years. And the key technical specs exceeded by a factor of 2 for no additional cost, and all delivery milestones were on schedule. MEERKAT is an official SKA precursor, SKA phase 0, so to speak, and will be integrated. So we employ over 200 engineers and scientists, and we have a human capital development program to grow the science and engineering and technician cohorts. Also, intention is to develop industrial capacity in South Africa to compete for the, sorry, that's badly spelled, should be SKA, not SAK. And MEERKAT will be incorporated into SKA mid to make up about 30% of the total collecting area. Just some brag pictures there. We made it to the cover of National Geographic. MEERKAT was designed and manufactured in South Africa. Those are workshops and factories up in Gauteng. 75% local content, as I said. We had an on-site assembly in the Karoo. That's the dish assembly shed there on the right. In that shed, you could, at any given time, fit in 4 antennas. Obviously, for such an instrument, you have a huge focus on data processing. So we also designed and built the fastest computer on the African continent. You won't read about that in the book, in the stats about it, because it's a single precision machine. They only record double precision machines in terms of the fastest 500 in the world, but we only needed single precision for this particular application. How does it work? You have 2 terabits per second coming out of the correlator into the Karoo array processor building. And then out of that, after the averaging takes place and synthesis takes place, 20 gigs per second go down a Sanren fiber to the Center for High Performance Computing in Cape Town. And then there are various tier 2, so-called tier 2 applications where the data is further refined. For example, IDEA, you heard about that from Sally a little while ago at the University of Cape Town and other universities, also Pretoria now, a partner, Western Cape, that work on refining that data so that it's much more usable by astronomers. The big data challenge is that, even with MEERKAT, you've got 2 terabits per second pumping out into the correlator, then 0.7 terabits per second going into the science processor, and then ultimately a compute load of 200 teraflops. With SKA1 mid, that pumps up by a factor of 25 into the correlator, and even more in SKA phase 2. So this is really more data than astronomers have dealt with historically by a large factor. A nice picture of the MEERKAT core, there with all the antennas pointing more or less in the same direction. So kind of an arty picture taken in the middle of the core. MEERKAT there, built by Africans in Africa for the world, very proudly so. This is a picture of the launch, and then that famous image of the center of our galaxy. And the amazing thing was that many people remarked that MEERKAT worked straight out of the box. This is, I think, largely as a result of the systems engineering approach that we've adopted. Our chief scientist, and I think I can quote him here, said that the remarkable thing when he came to South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, SARAO, the thing he noticed was the number of engineers. Usually he was accustomed at an observatory to see scientists milling around trying to build stuff, whereas with us it was done in a very different way. Obviously the scientists informed the spec totally, but then the engineers took it and turned it into something which worked. This is the most detailed image of the center of the Milky Way ever made. I won't spend too much time on the science because Bernie, I think, has gone into that earlier this morning. But there are 8 approved MEERKAT large survey projects, from pulsar timing through deep H1 studies, nearby galaxies, ultra deep H1 survey, pulsar searches, accreting transient binaries, deep continuum survey in different fields, and an absorption line survey as well. We also had 2 open time calls for proposals, one of which only very recently closed. So again, just some pictures. You probably saw these already this morning. First transient with MEERKAT, 2020, Dreesen. Most sensitive radio image to star-forming galaxies, Tom Mauch et al., 2020. This famous picture of the X-shaped galaxy, mystery solved at last, hydrodynamical backflow, and then a new mystery, the collimated synchrotron threads, recent discovery. No one quite can explain those yet. Just a summary, 6 of the 8 large survey projects are underway. The others are due to start shortly. UHF system being commissioned and to be followed by S-band funded by Germany, Max Planck. New call for proposals was issued on July the 1st. And to date, and this may have changed, that I made up the slide a week or so back, but 25 refereed papers at that point using MEERKAT data published in the past year. And they're just some, I've already explained those particular pictures below. Now, some of you may have heard of MEERKAT extension. This was came to us as a surprise. We were approached by Max Planck Institute for Radio Astronomy in Germany. And they've been Germany's been in and out of the SKA project for some years now. Max Planck very anxious, I think, to get back. We're able to get some resources from their government to co-invest with us in a further 20 dishes. What does the SKA think about that? Well, they like it because it de-risks the development for them and reduces the schedule pressure. Also demonstrates concrete progress to SKA funding stakeholders, not to mention enhancing the science capability of MEERKAT and further strengthening our scientific cohort for full participation in SKA1. And it also mitigates the risk of losing capabilities in SARAO. Engineers chase projects. I mean, the scientists are happy now that they've got MEERKAT. And engineers, when a project comes to an end, if they're good engineers, want to move to the next project. And this was a way of saving that capability until SKA1 came around. What is it going to look like? Well, you can see in that map on the right, the green dots are existing MEERKAT antennas. What will then happen in the so-called industrialization phase, those 3 large orange dots in the core, the MEERKAT core, those will be the first 4 antennas placed, and then they'll go out along those spiral arms up to 18 kilometers maximum baseline. Currently it's 8. So, and then in parallel with MEERKAT extension, the first 4 actual SKA1 antennas will be put in the core. Those are the, sorry, they're not in the core, those yellow circles just outside the core. Those are the first SKA1 antennas. So what it's going to do is it's obviously going to increase resolution significantly by more than a factor of 2, but also obviously some sensitivity will be added as well. What does the prototype dish look like as compared to MEERKAT? I mean, that's basically the Chinese antenna design. That's the first prototype, and that already exists on the site. There'll be, as part of MEERKAT extension, another 20 such antennas in the configuration that I showed you in the previous slide. Of course, you may ask the question, what about the back end? Well, we're going to put a MEERKAT back end on to the 20 antennas, and ultimately, when the SKA correlator comes around, we'll have to strip that out. The site's also attracted guest instruments, S-band receivers from Germany, pulsar instrumentation also from Germany, SETI largely from the USA, and then some standalone instruments such as HERA, CBAS, and now ultimately Hyrax is also planning to put the beginnings of their array some 10 kilometers or so away from the MEERKAT core. When we started out, we had very limited cohort of radio astronomers, and so we started a human capital development program in 2005, right from undergrad up to postdoc. 1,279 grants and scholarships have been awarded over the past 15 years, over 50% to Black South Africans and roughly 25% to South African women. In general, because we're very selective, we have higher than average graduation rates. And we recently completed an employment survey. 24% of radio astronomers employed by us, and 37% by South African universities' national facilities. So I'm getting whistled at for ending here. We have a technician and artisan training center because we want to, A, involve the local community, and B, it's easier to involve locals than to bring in people from Cape Town and Joburg. We have an internship program. We've employed 16 of our 21 interns historically. A schools program where we invest in local schools in the Karoo, and we fund all those that pass maths and science at matric level and get into university to study at South African universities. Socioeconomic benefits of investing in the Karoo, you can see those. Contractor forum, local business development. A summary of investment impact, 420 million spent through construction of Cat7 and MEERKAT, 134 million spent on local suppliers. You can see the rest of the figures there on the slide. And most importantly as well, thousands of employment opportunities. Okay, so how have we performed during the last 6 months? Well, actually, there was no downtime. All SARAO instrumentation remained operational because it's remote, because of the RFI issues. There's a backlog of planned maintenance being addressed. Teams at the various workplaces are kept to a minimum, and if possible, employees are still required to work from home. This, of course, is all made possible by the remote design in the first place. And there's daily screening and contact tracing remaining in place. We have not had any impact by COVID on our productivity. So thank you very much for listening, and apologies if I rattled through that very quickly.
Thank you, Rob, and an incredible project, and certainly I need to get my hands on that National Geographic.
Me too. Yeah, thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions that have come through, and please be reminded to send in questions while we go through these. The first question is from Andrew Firth, who asks, why does the SKA antenna distribution resemble a spiral?
Oh, that's kind of a fairly fundamental question. In fact, it's more, the best distribution is random. However, if you try and join up randomly placed antennas with fiber and roads, it's a mess, obviously. And so the spiral is a good approximation to what's required.
Okay, thank you. And then we had questions coming in. The other question Nicholas Kotzer had was, what are the current challenges regarding the speed of completing construction?
You know, with MEERKAT, as I've said, since we were in charge of it and we had the money, it wasn't difficult to keep to schedule given that we employed good people who knew what they were doing. With MEERKAT Plus, I think it's going to be the same because all the resources are there. The SKA one, I mean, you've seen the schedule that Phil Diamond put out there. It's a lot harder given the fact that different countries' money will come in at different times. And you've got to then schedule what you build first. You know, do you build all the infrastructure first? Because once you send all the big yellow machines home, if you put in half the infrastructure, it's very expensive to bring them back again. But what happens then if you've only got roads and no antennas? You know, so it's kind of a complicated problem to solve, largely because you're managing a whole bunch of countries who've all promised their governments different things. And so, you know, apart from COVID, it's a more complicated project to run.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rob. I think we're going to move on to the next speaker now.